Good morning, America. This is the Professor Billy Mitchell coming to you from beautiful Las Vegas. Today we're going to talk about front end geometry 101. There's three things that you need to know as far as basic front end geometry, no matter what type of race car you have, whether it's a street stock, legend, mini stock, modified, late model, tour car, whatever it is. It all comes down to where the rubber meets the road, and that comes into camber, caster, and toe. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing on the board here, the learning objective for all you visual learners. Learning objective is you will know how to set your caster, camber, and toe, how to check it each week, which you should be taking notes so that you can double check it when you do your scaling before you put your car in the trailer, okay, and go to the racetrack. That way you can tell if something's actually broken. You can tell just by taking these real simple measurements. So let's get started. What is camber? Camber, quite frankly, is very, very simple. It's where you take the tire, if you were to take the tire and lean it in or out. Now we're turning left, so on the left side of the car, we're gonna want a little bit of positive camber. And on the right side, we're gonna take that tire and tilt it away from the center line of the car. So you're gonna have negative camber, okay? And you're gonna have quite a bit more on the right side than you are the left because of the way centrifugal force is loading the tires. Now, we talked about in tire temperatures, how we wanna load the left side sidewall more than we do the right side sidewall on every tire. What that does is it makes the tire more efficient because the tire is literally the patch. If this is the tire and this is the patch, it's gonna move. If you put a GoPro on it, which we may do later, you can actually see that patch moving around because these tires, these bias ply tires that most of the small tracks are using around the country, the sidewalls are terrible on them. So what happens is they flex back and forth and they roll over and everything else. So tire pressure is also very, very important to make sure that you maintain that sidewall flex. So let's get started. How do we check our camber? Tools that you are going to need. This is what's called a camber caster gauge. I'll go ahead and get up close. This is one I bought off of eBay used. You can pick them up used. You want to make sure that, of course, you know, the person's reputable. This is an electronic one, so they're a little bit more expensive. You can get a bubble caster camber gauge, and the process is the same. You just need to follow the directions on the gauge itself because each manufacturer does things a little differently. One thing that I do recommend that you do is that you get a magnetic adapter on the front of it because that's going to allow you to just put it on there hands-free and you can play around with all the settings and read it and it'll stay there, okay? So you want to get a magnetic adapter. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to start, I always start with the left front of the car. Again, it's about repeatability and it's about getting the car, getting to know your car, take notes. The more you go to the track and not wreck your car, the more you can dial it in, take better notes, build your notebook, and for a given track or even your car. So we're gonna go ahead. I pulled the dust caps off of the car, things you are going to want to do, and I talked about this in my previous videos. If you guys haven't watched those yet, you may wanna go back and look at it. I set everything with the car simulated an inch off the cross member. The reason why I do that is because the tires are going to flex anywhere from a ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch. So that still gives you a little bit, about a 1/4 inch underneath the cross member, and the cross member should be the lowest point of your car. You do not, I'm going to repeat this again, you want to double check. You do not want your oil pan to be the lowest part of your car. Guaranteed. What's going to end up happening is you're going to hit a bump, somebody's going to hit you, and the bottom of that pan is just sheet metal. It's going to rub it through and you're going to dump 8 quarts of oil all over the track. You may blow your engine, you may wreck other cars, and you're sure as hell not going to make the promoter very happy because it's not a lot of fun to clean up 8 quarts of oil on the track. So make sure the cross member of your car is the lowest point of the car. I put a 1-inch block underneath there. The other thing I will do to prep it is you're going to take a ball joint splitter. That's what this is. This is a ball joint. Okay, I like to use the Hal ball joints because you can buy these in different heights. And if you guys want, please comment in the section. I can go over a video on how you can calculate your roll centers and where you want your roll centers to be for any given car, okay? So, and that's gonna drastically affect what spring rates you run as far as your big springs and what spring rates you run on your bump springs. So you got to know where your stuff's at. If you don't want to get that far down the rabbit hole, but you still want to be competitive, I suggest that you get with a chassis builder who has already figured all this stuff out. It'll actually increase your learning curve. You know, as long as you trust the person and you guys are speaking the same language, great idea. It'll accelerate your learning curve and get you faster on the track, so you know that you got a car that's going to be competitive. Again, ball joints, you're going to want to split this. Safety, okay, there's a lot of, even if the car is off the ground, there is a ton of kinetic energy on these springs. So you're going to want to put a jack underneath there to actually load the spring a little bit. You're going to pull the nut off, you're going to stick this in there, you're going to hit it with a hammer, and it's going to pop it loose, okay? Things that you need to watch out for. When you start using these bigger ball joints, the taper's different than a stock spindle. So they sell reamers, or you can buy an aftermarket OEM that's already been machined spindle so that this taper is correct. Because if you use the wrong taper, what'll happen is it'll work itself loose. As you can tell, this thing is not made out of metal. It's got like a coating on it, where if it doesn't have the right taper, it'll actually come loose on you. And then you'll be thinking that, you know, you have a bent pin and everything, and really you don't. It's just that you don't have the right taper. So you want to check that. You also want to check where it sits in the spindle so that, you know, you clamp down on it properly, and you can go through and these are Howe. Just so you know, I get these from Howe. Howe's got a great deal online. Chaz Howe and his brother owned that back in Michigan. Worked with them when I raced ASA back in the day. Great people, make good products. Okay, so you're going to split it. You're going to pull your spring out on both sides. You're going to take your shocks off. I would unhook one of the sides of your sway bar, which I do, and then you're going to set the car down gently on a 1-inch block. Then we're going to go through and we're going to start setting stuff and checking stuff. So you're going to take your gauge. You go here, you put it on camber. You're going to turn it on, okay? You're going to take real simply and put it on the spindle. It's going to stick just like it did. You're going to level out the bubble. Right now, our camber on this car is about 2.7. You're also going to want to check your tire pressures. Make sure that your tire pressures are consistent. I typically start with 10 and 15 when I'm doing the front end geometry, and that way it's the same every time. You're also going to want to start a notebook. You can go online, you can download setup sheets for free. Quick Car has them. I think Longacre has them. Joe's has them. Rebco used to have them. I think somebody bought Rebco or what have you. But the reality here is you can download them online, okay? So you can fill them out, print out some copies of them, or you can buy them from them. They'll be glad to sell them to you, okay? So we check that. Now, what do we want on the left side? On the left side, typically at 1 inch, you're gonna want about 3.5. So we're gonna increase this. How we do that on this car, which is very similar now to most of the modifieds, they use a multi-piece upper A-arm. So you would just take and release the jam nuts on here, just like you would do on a tie rod or a hind joint, and then you would lengthen that. By lengthening this rod, you are going to increase the positive camber, tilt this tire out, right? So if you shorten that, you're gonna take it away. We want positive over here, we want negative over there. So how much negative we want over there? At 1 inch, you're gonna start probably about 8. It's going to be dictated by your tire pressures, your tire temps, and the track that you're running. If you're running a lot of banking on the track, you don't need as much, okay? So you might want to just dial it in, okay? And that's perfectly fine. It's not a set number, but that's a ballpark. That'll get you in the ballpark. Then you can use your tire temps to get everything dialed in. You also want to be checking your travel indicators. You can make a real simple travel indicator. I just welded tabs to washers, put a bolt on there with a little O-ring. I marked them to where their actually dynamic height is. When I get all of this done, I will go through and I will make these little stands, which I talked about when I went through bump stops for dummies, and that tells you where all the geometry is lined up. And I want to explain to you why you do this. Multiple reasons. It made life a whole lot easier when I just took, and these are 1/2-inch heims, I just made real something crude that works. It just has to be consistent. So let's get started. Here we go again. So we're going to adjust our camber. Okay, once we got that perfect, Then we're going to go on to our caster, which is the second element of your front end geometry. And real simple with caster, what you are doing is it's the bottom ball joint and the upper ball joint, how far it is tilted back, or their relationship, how many degrees back they are. Now, a lot of guys will run a 1/2 degree, 2.5. Some tracks, the bigger tracks, you might run more caster to make the car a little more stable. A lot of what comes into play here is your ratio, how your driver likes the feel. Typically, you know, the smaller the track, you're going to want about 2 degrees of split. So that means on this side, if you have 1 degree, over there you're going to want 3 degrees. Okay, now it's a balancing act, because how you adjust that is this back strut rod on the A-arm to tilt that back. But when you do that, if you shorten it, it's going to take a little bit of camber out. So you have to go back and forth, and we're going to go through how to do caster real quick. On this car has an 8-to-1 steering box. My super late model had a 12-to-1 steering box in it. So it's a little different on how you do it. And I'm going to explain that to you right now. So I always put a mark on the top of the steering wheel. You can't see it because of the board. But you're going to turn the tire out, depending on which side you're going to do it. You're going to turn it out. With an 8-to-1 box, you're going to go a 1/2 turn. With a 12-to-1 box, you're going to go about 3/4 of a turn, okay? Because the 8-to-1 box is a lot faster and it's going to turn quicker, okay? It's all preference, guys. I would stick right in that range. I wouldn't go any faster unless maybe you're running on dirt. But I can tell you my favorite is about a 12-to-1. Even the 8-to-1, the only reason there's one in here because the car came with it. The guy who built the car originally, Steve Teets, he puts 8-to-1 boxes in there. I can tell you right now, not my favorite. Okay, I'd rather have a 12-to-1 instead of an 8-to-1. Okay, so now what do we do here? We're going to go ahead and level the bubble out again. We're going to set this to caster. We're going to zero it out. Now on this one, there's a little pot here, which is basically just a rheostat, that's going to zero it out. Now if you have a bubble gauge, you're going to actually manually adjust this little tab in there that's going to zero out the bubble. Once you get it zeroed out, okay, and other ones you just hit a button and it does it, okay? Either way, it all works. It's whatever you have available. So you're going to go back to center, and you're going to go in the same amount. Okay, now one trick I can tell you, it's very helpful. If you are checking caster camber with load on the tires, in other words, you have the springs in the car and such, or coilovers, little trick, okay, professor can teach you, put a bag underneath the tire. It's going to make life a whole lot easier when you go to turn the steering wheel. It gives it a little bit of slip. You can also use a bag when you go to scale your car, because when you start moving the car up and down and adjusting ride heights, that tire has to move a little bit, otherwise you're not going to get a real reading. So what I always do when I do my setup, I always grab a plastic bag or what have you and stick it underneath the tire. That way there's no friction on the bottom of the tire and the tire can move a lot easier. So a little trick for you from the professor. Okay, so now what are we going to do? We're going to go back here. We're going to zero it out again, and we are going to read it. So this car right now has about -3, which means that the top ball joint is back 3 degrees from the lower ball joint, which means if we wanted 2 degrees of split, we would go over to the right side next, and we would add it -5 after we set the camber. Okay, and that side's negative, right? I said -8. So at that side over there, you would have a -5. Now, of course, you have to be very coherent on how much travel you have, and you want to make sure at all times that you don't have tie rods that are hitting, you don't have anything that's binding up, okay? Because if you have a bind situation, especially on the right front, throw it all out the window. You're never going to get the weight off that right front tire. We've talked about that constantly, and the reason why I harp on that is because when I had my shop and people bring their cars in, 9 out of 10 times when they were complaining they couldn't get their car to work, they had a bind situation in the right front or somewhere on the car where the suspension couldn't move, and now you just turned it into a go-kart, and you're going to turn and you're going to load wherever that bind's at. You're going to load that tire ridiculously, so you have no adjustment. That's going to kill the tire's not going to last, and you're never going to get the balance on the car. So what you want to do is all the time with no springs on it, you should be able to just pull up and down on the tire and make sure that nothing's binding. Now if you're turning right, not a big deal, but you want to make sure that when you turn left, because we're turning left all the time, okay, you want to make sure, especially on the left side, on these modifieds, that nothing is binding up, because I can tell you based off of on an asphalt modified with this is a big metric clip, what they call the Impala or the Cadillac front clip, you have to modify the clip. There's no way you're going to get the travel you need to get the moment or the center of gravity low enough to actually make the car work without going through and cutting away any of the interference. Now, the rules typically say that you cannot change any of the pivot points. Do not do that. But what you can do is you can go through and start cutting away any of the interference, and then I suggest if it has something to do with like the frame, you're going to want to go in there and you're going to fill that back in with a piece of metal to make it strong again after you get the clearance you need, okay? But I wouldn't do that yet, because the last thing you're going to do is you're going to do toe, okay? So once you get everything set, you're going to put everything back the middle. Now what I did, you can use toe plates if you have help, because that takes two people, right? You have to put a person on that side, person on this side, and you use two tape measures. What I did is I made a toe gauge for this car. I painted it so it matches the chassis. See that? I know it goes to this car. Now what happens is I can use this by myself. You're going to slide this underneath the car at 1 inch. You notice it's 1 inch, so it'll slide underneath the motor and everything else. You are going to put it on the inside of the sidewall on that side. You can see these tabs are right at about 13.5 inches, or the center at spindle height, okay? So you're going to put it on the inside there, and then you're going to go on this side and measure. I've even put notes here so that if I'm at the track, I can actually measure just one time and see if something's bent. If you knock wheels with somebody, if you touch the wall, you bump wheels with somebody, 9 out of 10 times you're going to do one or two things. You're going to bend a hind joint on a tie rod, okay, or you're going to bend the tie rod, or you are going to bend a ball joint. Okay, an easy way to find that is when you go to check your toe. Now, are you going to be able to probably fix it? Say it happens in a heat race or qualifying, right? You're not going to have time to go back through and probably swap it out. And honestly, if it's just a tie rod, you can adjust it out, okay? Or even a hind joint, you can adjust it out as long as it's not binding. If it's a ball joint, you got to swap it out, which means you're probably going to miss the heat race, and you'll be lucky to make the main, and then you better start looking for other stuff, because those ball joints, you can see how beefy they are. Typically when they bend, something else gets bent too. So you want to kind of double check or have spares so that you can just swap it out. Some guys will actually have a whole nother setup for that side of the car, and they'll just swap out everything. It's already set, they just put it on the car, okay? It takes a lot of work and a lot of money to have that kind of resources. Typically most guys don't have that. I don't do that, but whatever, it's just fun for me now. So you're going to measure the inside, the back side of the tire, take a measurement. You are going to go to the front side now and do the same thing and measure it. The difference between the two is your toe. Now, where do you want your toe at? Now, this is very, very important. We're going to get into later videos when we start talking about bump steer. That's a whole video in itself, which I could do later. Again, whichever one of these videos you guys want to see next, please comment on there, and please subscribe and like and all that stuff on YouTube. It's not about, I'm not making money on it. It's all about just fooling the YouTube logarithm so more people can see it, okay? I'm trying to help out the community, build the sport. I feel like if you guys know how to do this yourself, you're going to be competitive, you're going to be happy, have fun, and we're going to have more cars and everybody's going to have a great time, okay? So we go ahead and we check our toe. Where do we want our toe? You're going to roll the car back, and once you get it up there and you get your bumps steer set, you typically, what I will do right now is I will set so that the front tires are out a little bit. Now, how do you set that? I will set a string the right side of the car because I want to square up the rear end of that string also, and I will square up the right front tire to that string. I will make sure that the rack is centered when I set my toe. Very, very important. You got to have the rack centered and in the same place. I have marks right here on the firewall. I also have marks on the steering column that tell me when the rack is perfectly centered. That means everything's square in a stock front clip. If you have that drag link over, or you're moving it around and you're not consistent, it's going to throw everything off. So you want to make sure everything's centered, everything's where it's at, that right side centered, and then you're going to turn this tire out about 3/16 of an inch. You want it out because with all the flex and all the movement that's going on in the front end, you have to have it out. If you have it in, or you tow the tires in at all, it's kind of like if you've ever been snow skiing or water skiing. What do you do to stop? You turn on your edges and turn them in. It's going to create drag, and we don't want drag, right? It's going to overheat the tire, and it's just not going to work well. So you want to make sure that you have it towed out anywhere from an 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch. Not a lot, just enough to make the tires happy, okay? So that's it. So once I get all three of those, give you guys another little tip here. Then when I get everything set, everything's perfect, okay, it's ready to go. Then what I will do is I will put these go in place where the shocks go. Okay, I have them marked left front at 1 inch. See that right there? Okay, I have them for both sides. I will use these to do multiple things. First thing I will do is go ahead and set my sway bar. I set my sway bar at 1 inch. Now, if you're making adjustments at the track, you can have buddies sit on the front of your car with the car at 1 inch and reset your sway bar with the car level, okay? The old way that we used to set the sway bar, you cannot do with these bump packages because it'll put too much sway bar in it. You'll never get the car to not be tight from the center off. So you want everything set up with the car level. You know, the old way we'd sit on the door and you'd have your buddy go over there and check the how much load you have on the bar or what have you, or some guys will do it up on the scales. I don't like to do that anymore. So what I will do is do it while I have it at 1 inch. Okay, make some measurements, okay, take some. As long as you're not changing a whole bunch of stuff in the front end week to week, you can go right back to those baseline measurements and your tire temps and dial it in. Typically, we're just going to use the sway bar to give the car bite off in an asphalt car. Dirt guys, you don't have a sway bar. You don't have to worry about it. Asphalt guys, you're going to use your sway bar to help you get off a little bit. So if your car is loose, off, and I'm not saying from the center when you pick up the throttle, because a lot of times the car will be tight in the middle, put a little bit of wheel in it, and then you pick up the throttle and it takes all the cross weight out of the car, and you know, the inexperienced driver will say, oh, the car's really loose off. Well, no, it's not. It's just tight in the middle, and as soon as you turn that wheel a little bit more, pick up the throttle, it's going to unload or take all the cross weight out of the car, and then of course you're going to be loose. So you have to be, when you're driving, you have to be very coherent on how much steering wheel you're putting in there. One of the things that I'll do, another secret, you'll see the NASCAR guys, everybody do it, they'll put a piece of tape, or some of the steering wheels come with a mark right in the center. Okay, a lot of people think, well, that's for me indexing the steering wheel so I get the steering wheel straight. Yeah, but really what you can use it as a driver is you can use it kind of keep an eye on how much steering you're going in. When you go and take your initial cut, and we're going to talk about maybe in another video, the 3 segments of the corner, what part of the car mechanically you're using and what you would adjust on the car if you have a loose, okay, which means oversteer for all you guys that are in F1, oversteer or an understeer or a push, right? NASCAR calls a push. Everywhere else they say, oh, understeer, right? So what part of the car? Because you have physics going on here. Okay, we all race on the same planet. Okay, so it doesn't matter what type of car you have to understand the simple physics that's going on, simple geometry that's going on. It's not difficult, and you can actually get your car dialed in based off of those tire temps. Okay, so with that said, we're going to end up this video today. Please like, share, and subscribe. Again, I said that, please. I hope everybody has a great Memorial Day weekend. Let's remember those that have fallen for our American Republic so that we may do what we like to do. We're finally getting back to what America is great. If you don't know me, I'm a veteran. I've fought 2 wars. I'm very much about America and the freedom that we have, and I know what it takes to do that. So, and I work for the government now. So with that said, hope everybody has a great weekend, and God bless America.